people that may want more books. Are we supposed to start now? All right.
Out of the books.
Yes, but they're getting a list together
Okay.
to get people.
Welcome, everyone. Is this mic on? I think it may be. Okay. We're going to go ahead and begin. And we weren't sure how many people were coming because this was announced late, and so you had to go through several layers of links to find about this event. But my name's Phil Amerson, and it's been my joy to work with Reverend Michael Mather. Mike, if you heard him preach last night, you heard a fine sermon, and we just want to have a chance for conversation. So there are seats up front. You don't have to sit in the pews there. We put seats in a circle so we could have more of a discussion. And if you want to grab a chair and use it as a table, that's okay too. And we promised the first 20 a book, and there have already been 20. But we're going to have a sign-up sheet, and if you can give us information, we'll figure out how to get you a book as well, as long as we don't have 150 come in the door. Mike, I don't know how you want to handle this best. Do you just want to say a few words, or do you want me to ask you some questions, or what?
Why don't you ask me some questions? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. Where did we first meet, Michael?
In the IU auditorium, underneath the naked lady. Am I remembering this right?
That's Bloomington before the new president of the university. That is right. And how did we get to know one another?
Well, we worked together for 5.5 years at Broadway United Methodist Church in Indianapolis.
Okay.
1986 through the end of 1991.
Mike, last night you preached a fine sermon about illuminators. Can you tell us a little bit about that word and what it means for you, and maybe what it means for your ministry now?
So, what it means to me now is that by the light of these people who live and work in our community, they live on the street. It's Nesty and Gabe are the illuminators. They live on the street, and they identify the gifts, talents, dreams, and passions of other people who live on the street. And then we sit around and talk about that. And we also have somebody we call the animator. It's a word that in English would be translated animator. And this person connects social capital to the gifts of people who are identified on the streets.
Yes.
I want to know how you are connected with the Illuminators. How do you connect with them?
Just talk with them.
So they're, where do you find them? Okay, so they're among us.
Yeah, they're just hanging around and meet them, walk.
You go to them, and they come to you.
Well, so when I first moved to Boulder to be the pastor, it was the pandemic, July of 2020. And all the libraries were closed, and our church has a very large patio in front. And it became a place where people who lived on the street would gather because you couldn't go to the library anymore. Huh? Probably. I'm trying to think if we had Wi-Fi there. Library, absolutely. Yeah. But mainly it was just to be together. I mean, people talked and got to know the people who are hanging out there. One of the things that happened with this, Phil knows this story, is that people from the church would drive by. Again, everything's closed, including the church, right? Nothing's going on. And people from the church would drive by and see people hanging out on the porch, and they'd say to me, again, I'm new there. And they're saying to me, you need to kick the people off the porch. And I said, why? And they said, well, because we need to keep our children safe. And I said, well, first of all, nobody's here. And secondly, your children have a lot more to fear from people in their own home than they have to fear from strangers who they don't know. What do you mean? But anyway, people kept talking to me about this, and I wasn't sure what to do about it. So after, a month or so of people asking me this, I said, I tell you what, I won't kick them off, but you could kick them off, but you can't kick them off until you learn their names. So a few days later, some of the leaders of the church came to me and said, could you set up a meeting? Sure, happy to do that. So we had 5 people from the porch and 5 people from the leadership of the church, and we sat together in a circle outside because it was the pandemic. And people went around and said their first name, where they were originally from, and what brings them joy. Each person, the 5 people from the congregation, the 5 people from the porch. That took about 10 minutes, people going around and saying that. Then they just started talking. And they talked for about half an hour based on what they heard from each other, right? I used to live there. Oh, I know that place. Oh, that type of thing. Or, I have grandchildren too. Whatever it was the people were saying brings them joy. And after about 45 minutes, I said to the gathered group, I turned to the people from the congregation and I said, so is there something you want to say to people here? And they're like, no, we're good. Because once you get to know people and know people's names and know a little bit about what brings people joy, it just leads to a different and more interesting conversation that we don't want you here. Right? So, some of those people, at least one of those people who was hanging out there later became an illuminator. Yes.
So add to the story. There's a wonderful book entitled When We Walk By. I would encourage, if you don't know it, to find it. Because, okay.
You don't sound the same as he does.
Well, yeah. I've never sounded that good. But, yeah, okay. There's a wonderful book entitled When We Walk By. And in that book, part of what the author identifies is that most of the people who are without shelter really are from, and it's a huge number, within 30 miles of that location. And they have family that are nearby. And when you want to treat people who are on the streets as if there's some kind of moral failure rather than a sickness or an addiction. Part of what happens...
Or a series of unfortunate events.
A series of unfortunate events. Part of what happens is they become disconnected from their family and community. So, Mike, I wish you would finish part of what happened, I think the next day or so, with a member of the church.
So actually it happened that same day. So later, I went back up to my office and was up there, and one of the leaders of the church who'd been in this meeting came up to me and said, Mike, I think I know Chris. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I think he grew up in my neighborhood, but it's been years since I've seen him. And I don't know. I know his parents. And I said, well, do they still live there? Yes. Well, go talk to them about it. So she came back to me a day later and said, yes, that was Chris. And his parents didn't know where he was. And just because we sat there and had this conversation, we found that out.
So other questions? I think that may be a good way to go.
Yes, ma'am.
So I ran associated was executive director of a soup kitchen for almost 20 years. And so these people, or they, suddenly become Fred or Mary or Sam or Sue or whatever.
Yeah.
And the volunteers who are looking at me saying, why don't these people just get a job? Suddenly change their attitude once they learn a little bit about them and their circumstances. And a lot of these folks even have a job. It's just, as the person that was the director before me said, this is the working poor.
Sure.
And primarily a lot of them are the working poor.
Yeah. I mean,
And somewhere along the way they may become homeless. But yeah, suddenly the they and the them become.
so we have a general, yeah. We have a general rule, which is people are endlessly fascinating. But it took me a while to learn that, even though Phil tried to get that into my head decades ago. But I went to serve a church in South Bend in 1992 and named Broadway, and Broadway Christian Parish, United Methodist Church. And we had a food pantry. And when people came to the food pantry, we got government surplus food. So we asked people the questions that the government gave us the forms for. How much is your income? How much are your expenses? It says, well, my income is $600 a month and my expenses are $1,200 a month. Oh, there's a lot we can do with that. At the time, we were a little congregation of 40 people, not a group with deep pockets. And, there wasn't something we could do about that about one. Right? So we took that information, we put it in a file cabinet. So we came to Pentecost, and we're sitting around in the church talking at Pentecost. And because after worship, there's lunch there at this church. There was lunch there at this church. That had been going on for 10 years. That little group of 40 people, meal for whoever. Anybody could come to the meal. So we'd be down at the meal, and whatever table I sat at, you could talk about whatever you wanted to, right? So we're sitting there, and this woman says, it was Pentecost. She said, you said that Peter, reading from the book of the prophet Joel, said that God's Spirit flows down on all people, young and old, women and men. And I thought, how good am I? I'm an excellent preacher. It's a half an hour later, and she remembers what I said. I'm really good at this. Yes, that's right. And she said, so how come you don't treat people like that? I'm like, what do you mean? She said, well, when people come into the food pantry, you ask people how poor they are. If you believe God's Spirit flowed down on all people, young and old, women and men, how come you aren't asking them that? I don't know.
You have to do that. In food that you're serving students.
Well, we're getting to that. So the very next day, the day after Pentecost, we started asking people 10 pages of questions about what their gifts were. And we stopped asking people any questions about what their income was. We asked people, have you taken care of older folks? Have you taken care of children? Is it because they're members of your family? Because you've had a job somewhere? Because you're helping somebody out? Can you fix a toaster? Can you drive a car? Do you play a musical instrument? Do you sing? Have you cooked for more than 10 people? Have you cleaned up after more than 10 people? We asked 3 questions at the end. What 3 things do you do well enough that you could teach somebody else how to do it? Because everybody, I want to stress this, everybody has something they can teach. What 3 things would you like to learn that you don't already know? And who besides God and me is going with you along the way? Well, the first person who came to us was a little woman about this tall named Adele Almaguer, lived half a block from the church with 3 generations of her family. And she said, well, I'm a good cook. And we said, prove it. She said, what do you mean? We'll cook for the custodian, secretary, and pastor lunch on Friday. So she cooked for us. It was great. We paid her for it. Great. Leadership of the neighborhood organization was meeting. We said, don't meet somewhere else. Meet here at the church and let Adele cook for you. She cooked for them. They loved it. Over the next 9 months, she cooked for Studebaker Elementary at a PTA meeting, Southeast Side Neighborhood Health Center had an open house, and Memorial Hospital had a press conference in our neighborhood. She cooked for all those. Then the Chamber of Commerce called. We want to have an all-day meeting of our leadership program in your church building. Well, that day works. We can do that. Since we're going to be there all day, we need to use your kitchen. We said we would prefer you use our caterer. They said, okay. We took $20 and bought her 1,000 business cards. Said, La Chaparrita Catering, spunky Tex-Mex food. And she fed 70 of the business and civic leaders in the community. They passed out her business card to everybody there. Through that, she got connected to the Michiana Businesswomen's Association. And a year and a half later, she opened up Adelita's Fajitas at the corner of 8th and Harrison in Elkhart. Now, if we had said to her, tell us how poor you are, we would have all ended up poorer for it, and we would have missed a lot of great food. Right? If she would have shown up the day before Pentecost, we wouldn't have known this. It would have been true. She would have had those gifts, but we wouldn't have known because we wouldn't have asked. We can't do anything with something we don't know. And so, to go back to your thing about to get the food, so the Red Cross, we had to go to this regular meeting and turn in the stats. And the stats we turned in were the gifts of people in our community. And they said, well, this isn't the form we need. And we said, well, this is the only one we have. If you want to stop giving us food, you can. And they didn't. And then the other thing is, more recently in Colorado, the version that happened with this is I was talking to a church group about this, and somebody said, well, you know, in Colorado, and this is true, the food banks that are run through Colorado do not allow people who are not poor to eat the food that they distribute. So in theory, you cannot eat together, right? You have to be eligible to have the meal. You know, you got to prove you're poor enough. So somebody held up their hand and said, what do you counsel in this case? And I said, I counsel disobedience. Because, I mean, these rules are crazy, right? I mean, how is it ever going to happen that we're going to get to know each other and be together in ways that will enrich us and each of us? The other thing I'll say is that I did 2 funerals 2 summers ago for matriarchs of the church. Each of them, both of them, have a son who lives on the streets of Boulder. This is not somebody else's thing. This is us. It is us already. Somebody had their hand up back there. Yes, and then Tom, yeah.
Nancy Pompous, Wall Street United Methodist Church in Jeffersonville. We had this writ small for us. We're in a downtown church in an area where people come for a lot of services anyway. And as such, we often have people using our property to sit there. And we had a number of people that were doing unacceptable things on our porches. So, you know, I finally talked to to stay on our property full time, and it's hard, and it's not entirely smooth, but it has been a really great lesson in kind of following God and trying to do, what we talk about doing. And it has been probably in some ways easier because she's, I don't know what the word is, she's very helpful. And she plays the piano, sings in the choir, things like that. Our outside has never looked so good because she speaks and trims. And it's been, we kind of uncovered her gifts just by sort of getting her a room. So
Thank you.
I would say that it's very possible to use them one-on-one. We weren't in a position to take on everybody, but it's been a great experience.
Thanks.
I think this microphone may work now, is it? Okay, so you want to say anything, Tom?
Tom.
We'll get to. Well, that's what I thought, John.
Okay. This is kind of a conversation starter. I've heard what you said earlier a minute ago about that lady who turned to be caterer. She was actually coming to for a meal. Am I correct? Well, I'm John Epps, a member of St. Luke's United Methodist Church here, and Stephen Minister, among other things. John Epps of St. Luke's here, and Stephen Minister, among other things. And I would like to extrapolate and stretch that a little bit. I would say something. I know I'm going to hear a bunch of groans. I think our goal should be to shut down soup kitchens and food pantries.
Amen.
That's what a real goal be. And I hear that. I didn't hear the grumble. Lots of times they're grumble. We should be teaching people to helping people to help themselves, so we don't have to feed them because they have the ability and skills. And
Actually, people already know how to cook.
but I hear that a lot. I hear a lot of groan things. Whoa, you must be. I'm glad I didn't hear that here. Thank you.
Mike, you want to comment on that?
Well, actually, in the UK right now, the Methodist Church is having conversations about how to end poverty. And one of the things they say is, how do we end poverty and they call them, what do they call them? Food boxes or something. But that's what the Methodist Church in Great Britain is having a conversation about. I don't think I've ever in this country been invited to a group of Methodists or others who want to have a conversation with me about ending poverty. And yet, I once was invited to Boston with a group of people who they call themselves from outdoor congregations. They live outside. And they were the only group in the United States that's ever asked me to come and have a talk about ending poverty. So the one other thing I want to say about that is a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, I got a call from an insurance company in New Jersey. Vice president of the company called, said, I read your book. Okay. Well, can you talk to me about poverty for a little bit? Sure. So we talked for an hour. And then she said, well, could you be a consultant for us? And I said, no. And she said, why not? And I said, because a consultant's a job. I have a job. I'm a pastor. I didn't have time to do that. And she said, well, can I talk to you about it every once in a while? Yeah. 6 months later, she called and said, we're getting together a group of people from around the country, about 15 people in health, education, transportation, housing, to talk about ending poverty. Would you be part of this? 5 hours a week for a year, we're going to have this conversation. And I said, okay, but I have 2 questions. One is, why is an insurance company wanting to have this conversation? And they said, well, she said, we're a Medicaid insurance company. And we know that if people have more money, people are healthier than people who have less money. We were, of course, shocked at this news. And said, okay, that makes sense. The second thing I said is, how many people who don't have money are a part of this conversation? And she said, none. And I said, well, then I won't be a part of it. And she said, well, do you know anybody? And I said, yes, but they charge $300 an hour. And she said, okay. And they hired 3 people from our parish in Indianapolis. and paid them over the next year each $300 an hour for 5 hours a week, $72,000 each. So I don't know if what we talked about did any good, but that did some good. But when we had the group together, when the group was together and we were talking, 70% of the people involved in this conversation were people who were parts of religious communities. And one of the things my friend Diamond and I asked them was, who here has had a conversation about ending poverty in your religious community? And not one of them. And yet it was something that an insurance company was asking people to have. Why aren't we having that conversation?
Yes.
Okay, Sarah Helmick, Greensburg, Indiana. So last night, and then just reading the foreword while I was standing in line for lunch of your book, you talk about the emphasis, it's kind of an aha moment, the emphasis between erasing the divide between the helper and the person being helped. And I think that's I don't know why it didn't occur to me before that what that might do to shift the dynamic. And so I was curious, like, I think that Christians often, whether it's intentional or not, like the idea of being the helper and how that makes the other person feel the power dynamic. Do you have any strategies to help when you're starting ministry or in a ministry to help the people who are volunteering understand that shouldn't exist?
Well, I think the best strategy we've found is asking different questions. Instead of asking people what they're missing, and you can't do anything with what's missing, instead what you try to do is ask questions about what people have and who they are, not necessarily their gifts. You can ask, who do you love or who loves you? And tell me that story, right? You can ask people, what are you most proud of in your life? Oh my gosh, the stories you get, the things people say to you, mostly because, man, there's nothing better than asking somebody a question they don't expect. Because then you're really hearing something. Actually, there's an actress who won the MacArthur Genius Grant Award who talks about 3 questions you can ask, which will get you the truth in one of those 3 questions. Tell me about your first day of school. Tell me about a time you were accused of something for which you did not do. I'm trying to remember the third one. Just panicking right now. But it was just like, come up with questions about what you talk about with each other. You know, where are you originally from? What do you do with yourself when you're not doing something you have to do? You know, just questions that people don't expect is what I think the best answer to that is. Yes.
Here, Patricia.
Hi, Patricia Williams from Fountain, Indiana. What do you do about the mental illness component that's such a big part of homelessness?
Well, what I do about the mental health component mainly is, you know, people then go home from church on Sunday. What I'm trying to say is, you know, mental health challenges are with everyone. I mean, I asked in church a few weeks ago, in worship a few weeks ago, how many people here? So let me ask you here. How many people in this room have dealt with addiction in their life or have people in their lives who've dealt with addiction? Yes, most of you, right? How many people here in your life have dealt with mental health issues and challenges or have people who you love who deal with mental health challenges? I mean, again, this is us. We are the world. So I just think, yeah, the mental health challenges, you know, well, then the trustees meeting is over and we go on. Actually, sometimes people say to me, don't you get tired of people lying to you? And I said, yes, but, you know, then the line after worship is done and we go home. You know, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine, Pastor. I'm fine. Everything's great. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes. Here you go, Steve.
Just want to thank you, Mike, that I had the privilege of serving after you at Broadway Christian Parish. And just want to say that I think we need the spirit of the circuit riders. The circuit riders didn't stop. The circuit riders had $80 a year, if they even got that, and were sent on the road, like Asbury. And they were sent on the road to do whatever God called them to do in a bar, in a place that was terrible, and they lasted, 13 years. We don't have that spirit in our churches. We've got these wonderful buildings, but we need to take God seriously to help us. And there are people just waiting for us to come with the message of the gospel, and they will wake up. At Broadway Christian Parish, we saw people that would come in and they would be shunned in most places, but they were right, and a circuit rider would follow these people to their place of residence and start a bicycle ministry. The thing is, we're not following people. We're still just inviting people. And I really love what
Thank you.
Broadway Christian Parish is. I can talk about that for hours.
One of the things is, though, I think we do it. I think we just don't notice we do it. And it's not what is counted in our reports either. It's not the type of thing we report on usually, because we don't get the question that would lead you to give that answer. What do you do with yourselves? How are you spending your time? People do remarkable things. I want to say one other thing about the helpers and things. I don't think it's Christians who want to be helpers. I think it's everybody. I think everybody wants to be useful. And one of the ways I know this, if you ask a child, and this is something I learned from Phil Amerson, if you ask a child when they're growing up, what do you want to be when they grow up? When you grow up, what do they say? I want to be a teacher. I want to be a nurse. I want to be a doctor. I want to be, fireman. Yes, police officer. Yes, all these things. Not one child has ever said, what I want to be when I grow up? A client. You taught me that.
I'm sorry. Yes. No, Tony, here.
So I'm in one of those churches, Tony Brinson, Goshen St. Mark's. I'm in one of those churches where we got about, 40 people who have any kind of means at all. And then about another 40 who are coming in who have no means. How did you support your ministry with the board, how did you grow your finances so you can continue to grow your reach with the unloved on the street?
Well, I would say a couple things about that. I would say one is, I think my experience in churches, and again, I feel like I learned this a lot at Broadway back in 1986 and 1991, is we could beat up ourselves a lot about what we aren't doing and what we can't do. And Phil and Mary Ann Moman, were always saying to us, how do we celebrate what's going on here, what's present and what's powerful? And that you can build off of. And that, we can't do everything. And the places I've served have often been places where they used to have 1,000 people or 500 people. And now they had, the 500 people had been back at Broadway Christian Parish in the 50s and early 60s were now, 40 people when I got there in the time. So instead of feeling good about what they could do, they could only feel bad about what they couldn't do anymore. And if you spend time beating yourselves up about that, it's hard to build any financial or any other support, right? But when you start paying attention to and celebrating what you do have, and when I say what you do have, I mean everybody. Somebody who doesn't have any money, but we would invite every Sunday at Broadway in Indianapolis, we would invite somebody for what we call the lesson from the contemporary church to tell us about what they were doing, what they cared about in the world and what they were called to. I used to do that when I was at Broadway the first time. I would do this once a quarter. And when I do it once a quarter, I would invite somebody to come in and say what they did, what they needed. What did you have, oh, you didn't have enough money for school supplies. Oh, you didn't have this or that. I mean, because that's what I was doing or thinking I was supposed to be doing. And years later, I changed that. And so it was the same people, but instead of asking what was needed, I'd say, so what do you care about? What do you love? I still remember I had these young people, these kids who were, 8, 9, 10, 11, and they had done a fundraiser in the neighborhood. They lived in the neighborhood and they were doing a fundraiser. And I said, what are you selling at your fundraiser? And among other things, one of the kids says, my mom makes cakes in a jar. And I said, what are cakes in a jar? And he looked at me like I was stupid. And he said, they're cakes in a jar. If you ask, everybody has something to offer. And finding a way to see that and say that and publicly celebrate it is what was important.
Okay.
Yes.
My name is Dave Nybauer. I'm from South Bend Grace, South Bend, Indiana, lay leader. Tell me I'm crazy. I'm going for licensed local pastor. Because everybody tells me the same thing. What I've noticed in our church is basically we deal with, I think it's the same Broadway up in South Bend. We work with them as one of our missions. But when it comes to missions inside our church, people would rather throw the money at it instead of volunteering their time. And the thing is, our mission has changed over there since I've been there almost 14 years. I used to teach kids how to cook because they didn't want to play basketball, because they felt excluded. They didn't get to be part of the thing. Now, 2 of the kids are now graduates of Notre Dame and St. Mary's. One is getting married. I'm doing her wedding. She just graduated with a degree in honors with micro something. I don't know what it is, but she's got a great job in New York, and that's the problem we run into. I may not have the money in the world because I do work for the church too part-time, but I always tell people, should you do if you don't have the money to do it? And I said, volunteer. Because here's the biggest problem, and we have it with our youth and young, our children. We'll set up things for the church and say, okay, we're going on a retreat, and the kids and people are just like, because most of our congregation is way older than me. So I didn't say, oh no, I can't do that. We'll just give you money so some kid can go to camp. And my philosophy is, as a kid, I didn't get to go to camp because we didn't have enough volunteers. And I've made my decision that if my giving up a weekend of my life eating the worst food in the world, or nothing but junk food, and these kids get to have a great time, and we do a yearly retreat in the middle of the winter, and it seems like it's always the coldest weekend of the year. But those kids walk away with a memory they'll never forget. And that's my biggest contribution. I love to be involved in missions. We actually have a homeless shelter in our church during the winter. They put it in our great hall. We have great volunteers, and they provide plenty of food, which is amazing. So I think just people need to realize that the mission has to change sometimes.
Well, and we think about it in different ways, right? Because one of the things I've noticed that have happened as people have gotten to know each other at Boulder first, where I serve now, is one of the things is like one of the illuminators was talking to me, and right then one of the other people in the church came up and said, Josie said, I'm going away for a couple weeks. Hey, Gabe, do you need a place to stay for a couple weeks? Could you watch my cat and stay in my place? He's like, yes. So, which was a lot better choice for him than staying in a shelter, right? And he had a good time. Then he did it again. Then he did it again. And it began to build relationships and friendship between people that ends up changing things, I think. Jesus said in John 15, I no longer call you servants, but friends. We often talk in churches about servanthood, and maybe we should talk more about friendship.
Chris.
I'm Pastor Chris Rowland. I serve the Calvary in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And one of the things I think a lot of our churches are discouraged.
Mhm.
I serve a congregation, like we were discussing, that had many members and is whittled down to about 30 or 40 now. And one of the things that I'm taking back from conference, I want to ask you guys a question. I want you to raise your hand if you're a disciple. Raise your hand if you're a disciple. And Jesus approached the disciples on their fishing boat, and they complained and said that we've been fishing all night. And he told them to cast their nets to the other side of the boat, and they pulled in more than they could handle.
Yeah.
So that shows me that no matter what, we need to keep trying to keep moving on and trying new things.
Thanks, Chris. Mike?
No, I'm a big fan of trying stuff. I'm a big fan of failure. And it's stunning to me that a denomination which is based, a faith that is based on the idea that our God gets killed can't embrace failure and know that it's not the end of the story. Anyway.
So one of the books Mike and I appreciated a couple of years ago is written by Anglicans in Great Britain, and it's entitled Being Interrupted. So I want to tell a story, and then I see one hand here. One Sunday, I went to the communion service at Broadway Church in Indianapolis, and Michael was to lead it, and I was the senior pastor, and he wasn't there. And I got more and more agitated. It's me. 5 minutes until, 4 minutes until. I go out and try to find the elements for communion. They're not there. And I'm really prepared to give this man a hard time. And then I hear sounds, people coming up the stairs. And Michael had the elements at home, and on his way to church, I realize this is a core city church and there are houses next to one another, but he was serving communion all the way from his home that was about 5 blocks away to the church, and people were tagging along behind him. Came up those stairs, and suddenly our circle that was 5 or 6 people for communion became 20 people. Because he was interrupting the Spirit was interrupting the normal flow of things. And I got taught a great lesson that day. Mike, you may remember that. I'm going to go back here for another question.
Oh, yeah, there's a couple of questions here. Oh, Mary Ann, you wanted to say something?
I always have a question. But I also think that I'm very retired. I'm getting a kick out of this stuff. I'm 74 years old.
Okay.
Mike.
To your face. To my face.
Yeah.
Mary Ann Moman, retired elder.
And you're getting a kick out of this.
I'm 74 years old. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, this is the most incredible experience in terms of learning about ministry. But I guess my caution in all of this is that we're all different.
Yeah.
We all do things in different ways. And I've learned a lot in this process of ministry over the years.
Because aren't you going to be 74?
I know. I know. In this process, I think it's been one of always being open to learning something new. And so, and the other thing I just want to say is Mike's book is not a prescription for him.
No.
And it says that.
Thank you, Mike. For over the years, I think as people, we've always looked for the next
Model.
magic thing to turn something around. And this is not magic, this is creating relationships and friendships and
every person I love is broken, and it's such a good thing.
It's a way to look at the world, right? And one of the things that's written about in the book is what we called around our place learning journeys. And one of the things when we would send people on learning journeys from our parish, both people who are in the congregation, outside of the congregation, to go and learn and spend some time with somebody, the only instruction I gave was, do not come back and tell me you want to do what you just saw. Tell me how it inspired you, what it made you dream about and think about. Yes, absolutely. And I learned that from you all.
So we're coming, I think we're supposed to go to 12:30, is that right? We're coming near the end. We've got one more comment and then our question, and after that, toss it to you, and I want to thank you then.
Thank you. My name is Ryan. My question is, you shared about your congregation's response to people gathering on the porch.
Yes.
Is there a community response from people that weren't part of your church, whether they were excited, like, oh, look what this church is doing, or were they like, hey, they're encouraging this, and what was your response?
Well, some people who live just a couple blocks away had written me emailed me to complain about the people hanging out on the porch. And then they told me they were from Indiana. And I said, well, we ought to get together. I'm from Indiana too. And so we got together and talked, and I invited somebody who I knew from the porch who also was from Indiana. And we just talked, and then they didn't email me anymore. I'm not sure why.
Would you join me in thanking Michael for sharing? Mary Ann's quite right about there's no formula. If you didn't get a book and would like one, Elaine's got a sheet here. We'll try to get some to you if you wanted to sign up for one. It's not a formula, but the other magical word, there was magic, and the word is relationship. Yes. Relationship.
Yeah.
So
you get the last word, Phil.
I always did. Actually, I'm going to give it back to you because in the end, I want you to talk a bit more. I think people don't maybe hear how you had to move through steps toward the illuminators and the animators. And how long did that take? How did you identify people? What happened if they failed? That sort of thing.
So I got to the church 5 years ago. The illuminators we started talking about and implementing last October. So 4.5 years after going there, right? I didn't even have that word about something. It was just things we talked about, and several years after I was there, we started trying this. What did you ask about failures?
Well, yeah. Have there been failures?
There's been plenty of failures.
Yeah.
Right.
You want to tell us about some of them?
Well, one of the things I want to say is, and you'll read this in the book, people often ask me about the book, well, why don't you tell a story of failure? It's all about failure. The story starts with me doing things to improve the summer program, and then 9 young men dying in the course of 9 months from violence in the 4-block radius around our church. And one of the things I always say, is that not enough failure for you? The failures happen all the time. So, I'm trying to think of one of them. But, I had done these things to improve the tutoring program, right? And when I came back I'd done those things in the 80s and 90s to help improve this tutoring program we had. And when I came back, I started asking the question, what's the graduation rate in this neighborhood been over the last 20 years that we had been running this program? And every year it had gotten worse. It didn't get worse because of what we were doing. I hadn't even thought about it. So some of the failures were hidden. Other failures were things like And again, do you want me to talk about First Church, or do you want me to?
Whatever you want to talk about.
So the other one, and again, I talk about this or another one, is that when I was at Broadway in the 80s and early 90s, we had this great thrift shop in the place, and it was great. People came from the local community, all this stuff. A lot of stuff got donated. And when I got back there in 2003, the 80 and 90-year-old folks who were running it didn't want to run it anymore. And none of the folks who were younger wanted to take it over. And so it stopped. And we put in the bulletin every Sunday, the thrift shop no longer exists. But people kept donating to it. You know. So one of the practices we started, and it was around failures, was celebrating ministries that had ended. And we did that because we realized that people were feeling bad about things that had ended. As if, that was the end of everything. And so we started doing this thing at the end of worship, one Sunday a month, right before the last hymn. We would celebrate ministries that had ended, ministries that were beginning, and ministries that were continuing. And the ministries that had ended, we did, the first one was the thrift shop. And we invited all the people up who'd ever volunteered in it, and we gave them a gift. And then we asked everybody in the congregation who'd ever donated to it to stand. And then we said, together, well done, good and faithful servants. And people knew it was finished. It was done. Because we corporately had recognized that. It took us several years to bury everything that was dead. We didn't kill things. I want to be clear about this. We did not kill things. We buried the dead. And I still remember the lay leader coming to me and saying, well, I've got one more, Mike. And I said, okay. And she got in front of the church that Sunday and she said, well, anybody who's ever said we've always done it that way before, please stand. And then together we said it as a congregation, well done, good and faithful servants. And people laughed. And when people laughed, they were learning, right? We were learning. So anyway.
Well done, good and faithful servant. Pardon me? This interview
is brought to you
by Brad Miller. Brad is producer of a podcast that we do. It's belongingexchange.org. Is that right? And you can go there. If you just go to Belonging Exchange on search, you'll probably find it. This and some other things. Brad helps.
This whole thing will be posted there, video and audio, and complete transcript. You want to make sure you get on the list, give me your card or something like that before you leave.
All right. And Mike's going to be around for a while if you want to come and visit further, or if you just want to visit with one another. Relationships, remember. God bless.
Thanks.
Well done.